Good afternoon. I would like to call the workshop of the Greenville City Council to order for January 10th, 2022. I'm Mayor P.J. Connolly, and I will be running the workshop today. Now I'd like to call on our city clerk for the roll call.
Okay. Mayor Connolly.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Glover.
Here.
Councilmember Daniels.
Present.
Councilmember Bell.
Here.
Councilmember Smiley.
Here.
Councilmember Litchfield has informed us he will not be attending this evening. Councilmember Meyerhofer.
I am here.
Okay, Mayor Connolly, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the approval of this afternoon's agenda. Madam Manager, any recommended changes?
Mayor, we have no changes this evening.
Thank you very much. Do I have a motion
Move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, motion's been made by Councilmember Smiley, second by Councilmember Daniels. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay.
Motion passes, Mayor Connolly.
All right, we'll move on to new business. Item number 1, Madam Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Item number 1 is a presentation on proposed stormwater regulatory changes. I'll call forward Daryl Norris, who will provide that presentation, and Daryl may at times call on Lisa Kirby, who's our city engineer, for comment as well. Daryl?
Thank you, Council, Mayor, City Manager. So what I'm here today to talk about is proposed stormwater regulatory changes. We've come to you before with a workshop of these upcoming regulatory changes spawned on by state rule changes to our stormwater program. And so this is a culmination of a year-long stakeholder process with our Stormwater Regulatory Committee. So currently, our stormwater regulations are made up of 2 different programs. Our federal MS4 Phase 2 permit that involves things like erosion control, public involvement, good housekeeping, and our TAR-PAM nutrient-sensitive waters program. It involves nutrient mitigation for nitrogen and phosphorus and riparian buffers. And then both of these programs have things like public education, illicit discharge, and stormwater control measures. With the state's rules updates spawned on by the Rules Review Commission reviewing the state stormwater rules, the city of Greenville was named in the new nutrient-sensitive waters program as well. So now we actually have 3 overlapping stormwater programs that we're subject to. It also made some modifications to the rules, and we'll go through those and what that means for us and our ordinance. It will require that we update our ordinance to meet these new rules. As we presented these rule changes to you previously in workshops about a year ago, Council decided to appoint a stakeholder committee. This is what we call the Stormwater Regulatory Committee, or the SRC. This is made up of developers, engineers, and others. And the objectives were to satisfy the state and federal requirements, to review city ordinances and policies, and to recommend changes to those policies. Over the past year, this committee has met 12 different times, all virtually, and reviewed, gone through the painstaking process of reviewing line by line of the stormwater ordinance and the changes within the state rules. We have a few members of the SRC here today, and as I go through and call your name, if you'll stand and be recognized, we want to thank them for their effort and the commitment that they've had over the last year. They've been instrumental in what we're presenting today. For developers, we had Landon Weaver with Bill Clark Homes and Rocky Russell with Russell Property Management. Engineers, we had Brian Fagundes of ARC Consulting, Steve Janowski of Rivers and Associates, Richie Brown of Stroud Engineering, Ken Malpas of Malpas and Associates, Igor Palavoda with Baldwin Design Consultants, Michelle Clements with the East Group. And then we also had from Sound Rivers, our riverkeeper organization, Jill Howell, and Dr. Mike O'Driscoll from East Carolina University. Our council liaison was Councilman Rick Smiley, and all of these members of this committee put in a lot of effort and time and reviewing those and submitting back feedback and comments to give us the most well-balanced program for the city. We also had staff from the Pitt County Planning Department and the Pitt County Drainage District, as well as numerous city staff involved in this process. So what I want to do is go through ultimately the recommendations that have come through this process. And I've got them broken into a few different categories to help us understand the differences. Some of these are required and spurred on by the state rule updates. Some of these were updates to our local ordinance, ordinances that are above and beyond the state rules, and things that we've changed to add flexibility for the development community and make these more attainable for compliance. So the state nutrient sensitive waters program rule changes. There was some updates to the nutrient limits for nitrogen and phosphorus that can run off of a development site in the stormwater runoff. Previously, because we were not named in the noose, we were named in the TAR-PAM rules. We were applying those TAR-PAM rules equally across our entire jurisdiction, even in the areas that drain to the Neuse River. You look on this map, the red area at the bottom actually drains to the Neuse River. The green area drains to the Tar-Pamlico. Now being named in the Neuse, there's a little bit stricter requirements for nitrogen. However, the Neuse does not have a phosphorus requirement. The state also has a new tool for calculating this runoff called the SNAP tool, and it is now required to use their updated tool for doing this. To add a little flexibility to the regulations, it now allows for what's called volume matching. And what this does is if a development is able to control the actual volume of runoff coming from their site to match the pre-development before they built, to match the volume that ran off their site before, they are deemed compliant with the rules and they don't have to provide additional treatment. So these
would that be like a retention pond, or how would that?
a lot of times this is done through infiltration and catching that runoff at the source. So retention ponds will hold the water and release it slowly, so you get detention, but ultimately that same volume is still leaving the site. In order to have volume reduction, you have to either use the water or infiltrate the water. So things like rain barrels with water reuse systems or any type of infiltration device can reduce volume.
Maybe you could, sounds like you're going to be using the word infiltration a lot. Maybe you could tell us what that means.
Soaking into the ground.
That's a great answer right there.
So these proposed changes, the state nutrient sensitive waters changes affect water quality controls. Our additional local options will have greater flexibility and water quantity controls, and then there'll be a category for stormwater control measures. The state changes also include allowing for public-private partnerships as a method of compliance. This is where a developer may choose to help the city upgrade our storm drainage infrastructure in exchange for compliance rather than providing treatment on their site, sort of meeting the bigger need. This also establishes existing built-upon area or impervious, anywhere that doesn't allow it to soak into the ground. This establishes essentially grandfathering so that any impervious that's on the ground when these rules take effect will not be affected by these rules. It's grandfathered in. This allows for better redevelopment throughout the city. The biggest change to these rules is the 24% built upon area density threshold. Previously, the rules did not have this. Whether you required to put in a stormwater pond or not depended on how much nutrients you were running off your site. Now it is is based upon your density. And so 24% impervious on your site, new impervious on your site, or greater would make you high density. Your development would be high density. Below that would be low density. And low density does require that it be, it says vegetated conveyances, basically use ditches and swales to convey that stormwater. For high density projects, it requires that you have a primary stormwater control measure. These are things like wet ponds, wetlands, bioretention, sand filter, or various infiltration devices. This is particularly impactful on redevelopment and dense downtown areas where you're certainly going to be in a high density situation, and this is requiring primary stormwater controls. These rules also require the use of the state's minimum design criteria. They've published an entire book of that. A lot of technical guidance for the engineers when designing it. Another big change for Greenville specifically is it eliminates the exemption for the redevelopment district. Currently, our downtown and West Greenville areas are part of a certified redevelopment district and therefore not subject to our TARPAM nutrient regulations. They're just exempt from it. These new rules do not allow for that exemption, and so those areas will be subject to these rules moving forward, and that's pretty impactful for those areas. In summary of the state changes, stricter nutrient and density requirements brought on by the state rule change. It establishes minimum design criteria. It does provide some additional flexibility to meet those requirements through those partnerships and volume control, and grandfathers existing development. Now moving on to additional local options that we looked at while we were reviewing the ordinance. These were some things that we were able to add in addition to the state rule changes. For most part, these are to add flexibility for developers to comply with these rules. This first one is called impervious surface averaging. So I previously mentioned about the density requirement, the 24% impervious area density requirement. And if you're high density, you have to have a stormwater control device on site. If you do impervious surface averaging, you can take an undeveloped piece of property, an undevelopable piece of property like floodplain, wetland, something that you otherwise weren't going to develop on. Put that into conservation area and pair it with your developed lot. As a result, it lowers your density calculation by having this area of undeveloped land that you can add into the calculation. It lowers the density by increasing the total area. As a result, these properties that normally would have been considered high density will be considered low density if they can still manage to use vegetated conveyances, swales, and ditches. There are certain requirements to be able to do that. These lots get recorded together, so we make sure that they're not double dipping and using that same conservation area for multiple developments. They have to be under protected permanent conservation easement to ensure that nothing gets built on that, because again, that development is counting on that undeveloped land as an offset. What this does, however, is it adds back value to what was a previously difficult to develop piece of property, if not impossible. And so now that piece of floodplain or that wetland that would otherwise be difficult to develop now has developable value, because you can essentially transfer those development rights to another lot to add density to a different lot. From our perspective, it also provides protection for those open spaces, those sensitive areas like floodplains and wetlands that we want to protect. It'll lock those into conservation easements so they don't get built upon. It will also add points to our community rating system, our floodplain insurance program, to help lower rates of flood insurance.
And is that because you believe that most of the land that will be used this way would actually, there was a path to development for it? I mean, if the land's already protected and by some other rule, and you allow land that was already protected to be used to diminish the requirements on, an existing land, it sounds like a net increase in stormwater.
It could possibly be if they were using land that was truly protected from development. The land within the floodplain and in the wetlands is not necessarily prohibited from development. It can be. Has to go through a permitting process and can be expensive, and it is difficult to develop, but it's not impossible. And we run into this when we get audited in our community rating system for the floodplain, is that any of those areas that we think of as protected open space, like floodplain and wetlands, don't actually count as protected open space because they're not truly protected. You can get a permit to build within them. Even in the floodway, you can get a no-rise certificate to build within that floodway. By placing them into conservation easement, it will ensure that in perpetuity that there's no development that occurs on that lot.
So it enhances the protection or the apparent protection of the land.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Another option that we are currently embarking on and going through the process of is a city-owned nutrient offset bank. So I mentioned earlier about the nutrient levels for nitrogen and phosphorus that development is trying to reach. Currently, those developments purchase credits through private offset banks. So rather than provide some treatment on site, they're able to purchase credits from a mitigation banker who does a project out in the county somewhere, out Greene County or Beaufort County or somewhere outside of the city's jurisdiction most of the time. And they go and they plant a buffer, plant some trees in a cow pasture, and they earn credits from the state. They then turn around and sell those credits to developers who use it for compliance with the rules. The city is looking, and one of two municipalities in the state, us and Wilson, are looking at developing a municipal-owned nutrient offset bank where the city will earn credits from city stormwater projects and sell those credits to developers, and then turn around and use the funds from those credits to fund the next stormwater project to earn more credits to sell to developers. For the city, it's a revolving retrofit fund. It's a revolving water quality project fund to help us accomplish some of those projects in the watershed master plans. For the developers, it's easier. Instead of dealing with a third party to buy purchase credits from, it also keeps that development money in Greenville. Right now, lots of money, millions of dollars, are being exported out of the city of Greenville into these areas where the mitigation projects are happening, because they're building the projects out where the land is cheaper and where they can put those projects in. But it's not where the impact of the development is occurring. So this provides the mitigation closer to the impact and allows the city to move forward with our projects. We're going through this project process with the state. They have never had municipal banks previously, and the city of Greenville and the city of Wilson are currently in the process of getting approval. Our first project for it is slated to be the Elm Street constructed wetland.
And the last clause thing here, so if I recall from the meeting, the goal would be that those investments would be related to the development in some way, right? In the same area. on the same stream, in the
They
same?
certainly have to be within the same hydrologic unit code, the same river basin.
That's what I meant,
So
that-
development in the TARPAM has to have a offset within the TARPAM. So the credits that we would earn from the Elm Street constructed wetland would not be able to be sold to development that drains to the Neuse.
Okay.
Another option that we're looking at is called a fee in lieu for our local attenuation, our local detention ordinance. So the city of Greenville is ahead of the game as far as detention ordinances. We have a pretty robust detention ordinance requiring that developers make sure that the flow leaving their site is no greater than the flow was before they developed. And they do this by putting in stormwater devices, detention ponds. They capture that water, hold it, and slowly release it at a rate that was before their development was built. Sometimes putting those devices in on a particular site doesn't make sense. Maybe that site's in the floodplain, and we're asking them to build a pond in the floodplain next to a stream in a sensitive area where it might even be counterproductive to do so. But to meet the ordinance, that's what they're forced to do. So we looked for an alternative method of compliance. In doing so, what we landed on is a fee in lieu for compliance. This is where the developer would pay a fee to the city of Greenville instead of providing those on-site controls. The city would then use those funds to invest in capital flood control projects that we've already identified in the watershed master plans. And would have a much greater impact than that potentially counterproductive stormwater on-site control. The developer saves on the land construction cost and ongoing perpetual inspection and maintenance for those controls, and instead pays this fee to the city. In doing so, we said, what is the potential impact of this? We don't want to allow developers to just buy out of the rules and then the downstream neighbors flood as a result of it. And so we wanted to make sure that we were protecting the citizens and property in Greenville. As such, we determined that a development site, in order to use the fee in lieu, must not have any stormwater capacity issues downstream of their site. So we took that rule and went back to our watershed master plans and created a map. And we marked off where all of the capacity issues were identified in the watershed master plans and excluded everything upstream of them. This is a pretty telling map of the state of our stormwater system. Everything in red is upstream of a capacity issue for stormwater. As you see, it's 90% of our jurisdiction, our developable jurisdiction. It's pretty impactful. So what we see in this map, though, is sometimes there's one particular culvert at the far downstream end that has a capacity issue, and now everything upstream of that is excluded. And so with the completion of one master plan project, large swaths of this red area can turn back white and be eligible for the fee in lieu. And we feel like this is a map that we can use as a visual tool that shows the progress we're making to upgrade our system and provide better capacity.
But all those fees would be restricted, right? They'd be going into the stormwater enterprise fund and only used for stormwater. They wouldn't be
Yes.
returnable to the general fund or anything like that.
Correct. Right now, those peak flow regulations that we were referencing have a couple exemptions that are available. One of those is if you increase your flow on your site by less than 10%, your site's exempt. Seems like a good idea in theory, except 9% plus 9% plus 9%, it adds up over time. And a death by 1,000 cuts, so to speak. The fee in lieu provides us with a different option than just exempting those smaller developments. And so rather than have that exemption, we eliminated the exemption, but instead allow the fee in lieu to be used for those projects regardless of the area. So even in those red areas, if they're under a 10% increase, they can use the fee in lieu, or they can provide on-site controls. The Stormwater Regulatory Committee took a specific look at this and actually stated that that was in the interest of fairness, that everybody should pay their fair share, even no matter how small. The other exemption was if a site is directly adjacent to a floodway. Originally, the idea behind this exemption was to allow the runoff to get off their site and in the river and downstream before the rest of the water came down the creek and added onto it. And in theory, that works, except there are mapped floodways all the way across town. For instance, in Greens Mill Run, there's mapped floodway all the way to the west of Allen Road, at the very headwaters of the Greens Mill Run, which has multiple capacity issues all the way down. We certainly don't want to be exempting properties from their peak flow controls that far up the creek. So that was also eliminated as an exemption.
Does this may be an engineering premise that's, that engineers don't hold, right? Is there a point at which you exceed the ability of engineering to actually expand the flow, the capacity of the watershed, right? So that
Yes.
You could say, yes, I'd like to do fee in lieu, so that you can use that money on an engineering project downstream, which would expand the capacity. And presumably, you'd reach a point where you'd say, there's nothing we can do. The capacity, the watershed is at capacity. No amount of additional engineering is going to expand it. Would those people be eligible for fee in lieu at that point? Or is that really an engineering achievement beyond the scope of this plan, I guess, maybe is the...
It certainly would be that.
Okay.
Per our 7 watershed master plans, there's over $400 million worth of stormwater improvements that need to be done. So I would say
for the foreseeable future, there's always something we could be doing.
We can have this conversation $395 million from now.
Okay. So, PJ, that'll be what, next week, next year? Okay, yeah.
Something like that.
The additional local summary is that these are intended to provide more flexibility to meet these requirements, generate revenue for city projects as identified in the master plans that better protect our citizens, property owners, and the environment, and to make the most efficient utilization of those stormwater investments, both public and private. Finally, we have an entire section of our ordinance that deals with stormwater control measures and their operation and maintenance. Per our requirements through our permit and the rules, we, the city, are required to ensure that all these stormwater devices that go in continue to operate and are maintained properly. One of those things that we're changing is to ensure that existing stormwater control measures are compliant prior to issuance of a CO, of a certificate of occupancy. This seems like common sense, but when a pond has been existing for 20 years and maybe has lacked maintenance, and then they want to develop an out parcel that drains to that pond, before that out parcel can get a certificate of occupancy, that pond needs to be brought into compliance. This is a excellent enforcement mechanism to help us get ponds in compliance that maybe didn't have the protection of the operation and maintenance agreements that our current ponds do.
What about redevelopment of the existing footprint? So if they wanted to knock a building down, put a new building in its place, and then they get a CO for the new building,
Same thing. If they're draining to a pond and taking credit for that pond must be in compliance for them to get a certificate of occupancy. We're also establishing a 1-year developer warranty for these stormwater control measures. The first year of a stormwater pond is critical for its continued success and throughout its life, especially devices that are planted. That first year is the establishment phase for those plants. It shows any construction defects, any type of problems you're going to have with a pond. Most of them show up within that first year. As such, we're establishing a 1-year development warranty, and then at the end of that year, we will have a handoff procedure that helps facilitate the transfer of responsibility for that pond from the developer to the homeowners association or the property owners association. The idea is to make sure that the HOA is inheriting a facility in like new condition. Then they're not getting one that's on the verge of being non-compliant.
And where is the sign off in the city in that? Is that engineering?
Yes. We also clarify the acceptance procedures for these ponds and erosion control on phase developments. Once a stormwater facility is accepted, as part of the street acceptance, the pond, the pipes, and the roadway are accepted, and they've been approved, they've been installed correctly, they've been accepted. That is now part of the stormwater drainage system, and so it can no longer be used as an erosion control basin. To allow sediment and debris to go into that pond would actually be an illicit discharge at that point, because it would make that pond fall into noncompliance. As a result, home sites need to keep their sediment on their site and protect an accepted street from the erosion from those individual home sites. We had several on-site meetings with the developers of the committee to review this phase in particular, section in particular. We currently perform annual inspections. We require annual inspections from the owner to hire a qualified professional for the stormwater control devices. However, right now, we only require that of the water quality devices that are required by the state rules. The ones that are put in simply for detention purposes are not actually required to have annual inspections. We're looking to change that to make all stormwater controls be treated the same. They should all have an operation and maintenance agreement. They should all have annual inspections. They should all continue to function in perpetuity. We're also looking to expand the definition of qualified professional. Instead of just a professional engineer or certified professional in stormwater quality, we're also allowing a certification from NC State for stormwater control measure inspection and maintenance.
So is this something on the order of, I know my HOA has to have, we have a drainage system at some point, and there's a backflow preventer, and it seems like every year we have to hire a plumber to go in and inspect the backflow preventer and certify that it is, in fact, preventing backflow, I suppose. And I guess that's what, then they have to send that to utility, or the utility won't let us continue to run an irrigation system there.
Right.
So is that something akin to that?
It's similar to that as well. Yes. If you have a stormwater control measure, it is to offset your flows and the nutrients that are coming from your development, and it only does so if it's functioning properly. And so as a result, those annual inspections are part of the operation and maintenance agreement with the city. The owner would hire a professional to go perform those inspections and submit it to the city. Currently, the city is performing those annual inspections as well. So the owner's hiring a professional, and city staff are doing annual inspections. City staff is looking to back that down to once every 3 years, especially considering we're adding in all of those detention facilities, which will increase our list threefold. Because of that, we are relying more heavily upon the owner's qualified professional to perform these inspections properly, and therefore we added in a provision for auditing and enforcement when those inspections are not up to par. That involves probation and education with staff to ensure that they are performing proper inspections. In summary, the operation and maintenance summary is that we're looking to maximize city resources while ensuring compliance. provide more education and protection for the stormwater control measure owners, and to clarify those responsibilities of the city's developers and the owners. So the timeline of where we are with these changes. The model program, the model ordinance was developed by the state, and that was sent out to the communities and said, okay, here's the example, you need to go update your ordinance. We then embarked upon the stakeholder committee process. We've spent a year-long process doing that. We currently have the red lines of the ordinance under legal review, a contract with an attorney who specializes in stormwater and municipal ordinances. The next step is to send it off to NCDEQ for their review and concurrence, and then they will submit to the state's Environmental Management Commission for approval. And then we'll be coming back to you in the fall for adoption of the ordinance to take effect January of '23. Again, I want to thank all of the members of the Stormwater Regulatory Committee. They all signed the document stating that while we may have had some disagreements in the process, that was the point of the stakeholder committee, but ultimately reached consensus and felt like what we're presenting is the best program for the city of Greenville and its citizens. With that, I'll take any additional questions you may have.
No questions? All right.
Did an excellent job.
I
Councilmember
will,
Smiley?
yeah, I will take the opportunity to thank the people who were involved. They were, I did not make all the meetings, and confess I didn't pay rapt attention at every moment of every meeting. But the people who were there were working very hard at this, and it's really appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate all the information. We appreciate everybody's dedication to working on these important issues for our community. Good job, and if that doesn't fire you up and ready for the rest of the meeting, I believe our police chief is going to fire us up next.
I was going to say, where is
Mayor, the next item is an ordinance requested by the police department to amend section 12-1-3 of the city code to establish civil and criminal penalties in compliance with North Carolina Session Law 2021-138. And I'll ask Chief Holtzman for that presentation.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Pro Tem, and members of the council. This is a pretty short one, but an important one, and I think it allow us to safeguard our community a little bit better in the future. So, for a bit of background, this past year, all city ordinances historically were able to charge with a criminal offense by the police. If they felt there was a need for it, you could write it as a criminal citation and as a misdemeanor. This past year, the legislation took Session Law 2021-138. Essentially what the legislation did was they nullified all the criminal penalties and said it's no longer a default that you can charge any of your city codes with a criminal violation unless you specifically state it in your code. So now we have to go back and identify the important ones within our code that need to have the criminal language added in there along with the civil language. So this is the very first one to bring back. There may be some others. Won't be as many as you think. However, the entire code will have to go under a review for it. So what we want to bring for you today for your today's point is just a workshop. It's just to introduce the idea, and it will have to be brought back in February for a reading, a first and second reading. So we're here to address the idea of discharging the firearm in the city limits. Again, the city code had been for a criminal charge for this, and now it's a civil penalty. So what this would do would add language under section 12(1)(3) for discharging a weapon in the city limits, and allow the police officers to charge them with a criminal violation along with the civil penalty, just like it was in the past. So it would kind of reinstate that. We'll also set a penalty by state law of no less than $100, no more than $500 for that criminal misdemeanor, and then allow us to add some civil penalties. So this is new language that you'll see in different ordinances that are brought to you. And so the proposal that we have here is that the civil penalty would be a $250 violation for a first offense, and then a $500 violation for any subsequent offenses. So this is just language that we drafted up with our city attorney's office. As I mentioned earlier, today's idea, it was just to bring the topic to you, that the law had changed based on December 1st session law, so we're kind of out of the ability right now to charge with that. And we'll be bringing this back in February for a first and second official reading and allow you to take action on it in February to allow us to reinstate a criminal misdemeanor charge for discharging a firearm in the city limits.
All right.
Any questions?
Any questions, Chief Holtzman? Councilmember Meyerhofer?
Thanks, Chief. Just on a broad scale, you briefly touched on it, but how much work is this going to be for you guys? How many more times are you going to have to do this?
What I'm hoping, and we'll have to talk with the manager's office to make it the most efficient. We don't want to come in here repeatedly. What we did was we picked out the most important charge we felt from a public safety standpoint, which is discharging a weapon in the city limits, to bring to you now. We have done an initial review of some of the chapters that deal with the public safety to bring them back sort of in a block. And then there are sections of the city code that can no longer be charged as criminal offenses. As the city attorney, Mr. McGirt, pointed out, things such as zoning cannot be charged as criminal offenses. So those are going to kind of be exempt from this discussion, other than to update maybe some fines and fees. So I'm hoping to bring back maybe just one more block of a couple of charges that we felt that would be considered for criminal offenses, so we're not back up here a lot.
Are there, in your opinion, is there a lot of city codes or city ordinances out there that were criminal penalties that have been decriminalized now, or is it just, a select few?
So all of them have been, the entire city code has been decriminalized.
Right.
At this point. How many had we charged in the past? I would say several, but we'll be bringing back fewer of those than we had in the past. There's only a handful, I think, in the end of the day that really need backed up by a criminal offense. Most of it can be handled by a civil offense.
Okay.
Council, Emmanuel McGirt, City Attorney, we need to do an audit of the city code to see how many city code provisions can be enforced criminally. I just did a search recently, and I saw misdemeanors show up a lot if you search the city code, so we need to go back and bring something to council striking that. But from my experience, most city codes aren't enforced criminally. Something like discharging a firearm, noise ordinance, those type of codes are typically enforced sometimes criminally, but most codes are not. And the General Assembly passed a law where now you can't even enforce certain code violations like a zoning violation or a minimum housing code violation. The General Assembly struck city's authority to do that. I think they're trying to make uniform criminal citations for code violations across the board from city to city. They're trying to get some uniformity. So now you can't, if somebody has a zoning violation or a minimum housing code violation, that can't be enforced criminally now under the new session law.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Councilmember Smiley kept tapping me over there. He said that he missed a few of the notes during the stormwater presentation. So, Ms. Kirby, do you think you could come back and repeat that whole presentation?
Just slides 17 through 33.
Just joking, just joking. That's it.
That's it for the
All
workshop.
right, so I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All right, motion was made by Councilmember Bell, second by Councilmember Daniels. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay.
Motion passes.
We are officially adjourned. See you guys.